The man in the 12-year-old Honda with the sun-faded paint, the one packing a lunch from home and carrying a wallet held together with a rubber band. And the man 3 parking spaces over, climbing out of a leased German SUV in fresh sneakers and designer everything. One of these two has a net worth north of $2 million. The other is one missed paycheck away from the whole thing falling apart. And the part that tends to bother people is this: it is almost never the one you would bet on. Real wealth in America has learned to go quiet, and over the next half hour, you are going to learn exactly how to recognize it. 10 signs that someone is genuinely rich, even when every surface detail screams that they are broke. So how does a person end up sitting on 7 figures and still look like they are barely getting by? Start with a number most people find hard to believe. There are nearly 24 million millionaires living in the United States right now, according to the most recent global wealth research from UBS, and the country is minting them at a rate of more than 1,000 new ones a day. That works out to roughly 1 in 15 American adults. Sit in a coffee shop with 30 people in it, and statistically 2 of them have a 7-figure net worth. Now ask yourself an honest question. Could you pick them out of that room? Almost nobody can, and that blank spot in your radar is the whole point. The loud spenders you assume are wealthy are usually the ones drowning quietly behind the scenes, while the people genuinely building money have no interest in advertising a single dollar of it. There is a phrase for this in the research world, the millionaire next door, and decades of data keep proving it true. The typical American millionaire is not a celebrity or a trust fund heir. They are a business owner, a retired teacher, a welder who ran his own shop, a nurse who never missed a contribution. They got there slowly on ordinary incomes by doing a handful of unglamorous things with relentless consistency. What you are about to see is a field guide to those things, the signals that survive contact with an actual bank statement instead of an Instagram feed. Once you learn to read them, you will never look at a parking lot the same way again. Before we get into the list, hold on to one idea because it explains all 10 signs at once. Income is not wealth. Income is the money that flows in, and it is loud and easy to see. Wealth is what quietly stays, the gap between what you earn and what you spend, multiplied by time. A surgeon pulling in $500,000 a year who spends every cent of it has a huge income and almost no wealth. A plumber earning a fraction of that who saves and invests a steady slice of every check can quietly become the richer of the two. Social media has only made this harder to see because every feed is engineered to show you the income, the cars, the trips, the renovations, never the boring brokerage balance underneath. The genuinely rich learn to ignore the performance and play the quiet game instead, and the signs below are simply the footprints that game leaves behind. Let's start with the one parked right in front of you. Number 1, they drive a car that tells you nothing. The single fastest way to misjudge someone's wealth is to look at what they drive, because the relationship between cars and money runs in almost the opposite direction from what you would expect. Consider where the market sits in 2026. The average new car in America crossed just over $50,000 at the end of 2025, an all-time high. The average new car payment now lands around $770 every single month. More than 1 in 5 new car buyers have signed up for payments above $1,000 a month, and nearly a quarter are stretching those loans out to 7 years or longer just to make the numbers fit. People doing that are not the genuinely rich. They are renting the appearance of a rival and paying interest for the privilege. The actually wealthy move in the other direction. Research going back to the classic study behind the millionaire next door found that the typical millionaire spends only about 1% of their net worth on the car they drive. Run that on a person worth $2 million and you land near a $20,000 vehicle, often bought lightly used and kept for the better part of a decade. Compare that to a typical buyer who routinely sinks closer to a third of their entire net worth into a depreciating machine. The most common brands among the wealthy are not the ones on billboards either. Toyota, Honda, and Ford keep showing up at the top of the list, chosen because they start every morning and cost almost nothing to keep running. Take Curtis, a retired high school shop teacher I think of as the perfect example of this. Curtis drives a 16-year-old pickup with a small dent in the tailgate that he has never bothered to fix. To anyone glancing over, he looks like a man on a fixed pension counting his pennies. His brokerage account tells a very different story, well into 7 figures. Built one paycheck at a time across a 30-year career. When people ask why he does not finally treat himself to something new, his answer never changes. A car is a tool that moves him from one place to another, and the truck does that flawlessly, so why hand a dealership $40,000 to solve a problem he does not have? That faded paint and that little dent are not signs of struggle. They are the visible receipt of a decision that quietly funded his freedom. There is one more layer worth understanding here. A new car loses a huge chunk of its value the moment it leaves the lot, and keeps bleeding value every year after, which means a financed new car is a guaranteed loss strapped to a monthly payment. New vehicles have drifted so far out of reach that, by recent industry data, well over 40% of all new cars sold now go to households earning $150,000 a year or more. A new car has quietly become a luxury good. The genuinely rich know this better than anyone, which is exactly why so many of them refuse to buy one new, or buy gently used and then drive it into the ground. They would rather own the appreciating asset and let someone else eat the depreciation on the shiny one in the next lane. Number 2, they live in a house that is smaller than they can afford. Drive through the neighborhoods people associate with money, the ones with the gated entrances and the lawns that look vacuumed, and you will find a surprising number of stretched budgets hiding behind those big front doors. The genuinely rich tend to do the reverse. They buy the modest house on the ordinary street, the one that costs far less than the bank told them they qualified for, and then they let the difference compound somewhere else for 30 years. There is a famous example almost everyone has heard and almost nobody copies. One of the most successful investors of the last century still lives in the same Omaha house he bought back in 1958 for around $31,500. He could buy any home on earth. He chose to keep the one that does the job. That instinct shows up at every level of real wealth, not only the billionaire tier. The school teacher who retires with a 7-figure portfolio usually did it in a 3-bedroom ranch, not a mansion. The reason is simple once you see it laid out. Every extra bedroom is more property tax, more insurance, more square footage to heat and cool, more furniture to fill rooms nobody walks into, and far more money that never gets the chance to grow. A bigger house feels like a reward you earned. For most people, it quietly becomes the anchor that keeps them from ever pulling ahead, because the mortgage swallows the exact dollars that could have been building wealth in the background. The genuinely rich understand that a home is partly a place to live and partly a money decision, and they refuse to let the second part wreck the first. They would rather have a paid-off modest house and a fat investment account than an impressive address and a payment that owns them until they are 70. Number 3, their clothes and their watch give away absolutely nothing. Train your eye on this one, and it becomes almost funny how often the surface lies. Genuinely wealthy people are notoriously hard to read at a glance because they have stopped using their bodies as a billboard. The logos are gone. The watch, if there even is one, is more likely to be a sensible everyday piece than a status symbol you are supposed to recognize from across the room. They wear plain, well-made basics that last for years, and they replace those basics only when they actually wear out. Now compare that to how status spending really works. The flashier the brand, the louder the message, the more likely you are looking at someone trying to convince the world, and probably themselves, of a station they have not quite reached. A person who feels financially secure does not need a stranger to validate it. The quiet confidence of someone who knows their number, who knows exactly how many months or years they could survive without working, simply does not require a single visible label to feel whole. So when you meet someone whose outfit refuses to tell you their income, who could be the contractor or could be the person who owns the entire contracting company, pay close attention. That blankness is frequently the tell. There is a well-documented pattern where the people spending the most on luxury goods are often not the wealthy at all, but middle and upper middle earners trying to look the part, while the truly affluent shop for value and comfort. The richest person in the room is often dressed like they are about to run errands, because they are, and because they genuinely could not care less what you assume their clothes cost. There is even a name for this now. People in the wealth world call it stealth wealth, and it has quietly become the dominant style among those who actually have money. Loud logos and obvious status pieces have started to read as a little desperate, a little try hard, while the real signal of money has flipped to the opposite extreme. A plain cashmere sweater with no visible brand. A bag with no hardware screaming its maker. Shoes chosen for how long they last rather than how many heads they turn. The people who can buy anything have largely stopped wanting to be seen buying it, and that quiet reversal is one of the most reliable tells you can train yourself to notice once you know it exists. Number 4, they go quiet whenever money comes up. Listen at any gathering and you will quickly notice who narrates their own spending. Someone always mentions what the trip cost, what the renovation ran, what the bonus came in at. The genuinely wealthy are almost never that person. They have a strange and consistent habit of saying nothing about prices, income, or purchases, and the reason runs deeper than simple modesty. Part of it is strategic. Talking about money invites comparison, requests, resentment, and judgment, and people sitting on real assets would rather not paint a target on their own backs. But the bigger reason is that for them, money has stopped being exciting. It became plumbing a long time ago, the boring system humming in the background that lets the rest of life happen, and nobody throws a party every time the plumbing works. Think about Walt, a man who ran a small heating and cooling business for 30 years before selling it. Ask Walt what he does, and you will get a shrug and the word retired. Spend an afternoon with him, and you would never guess he quietly owns the building his old shop sits in, rents it out, and collects more in monthly income from that one property than most people earn at their jobs. He drives the second cheapest truck on the lot, splits an appetizer, and lets every conversation about money drift right past him without ever revealing his hand. People who loudly perform financial success are usually still climbing or faking the summit. The ones who actually reach the top tend to get quiet because there is nothing left to prove and a long list of reasons to stay low profile. And the next sign is where that hidden machine finally becomes visible if you know exactly where to look. Number 5, their money is invisible because it is always working. This is the heart of the whole thing. The sign that truly separates someone who looks rich from someone who is rich. The genuinely wealthy keep the bulk of their money in places you will never see at a dinner party, and they feed those places relentlessly, year after year, mostly on autopilot. While the broke but flashy crowd routes its cash into car payments and visible upgrades, the quietly rich are pouring money into a stack of accounts that the average person leaves half empty for an entire lifetime. Look at what the system actually allows in 2026. You can put $24,500 into a 401k this year. On top of that, You can add $7,500 into an IRA. If you are on a high-deductible health plan, you can stuff $4,400 into a health savings account as an individual, or $8,750 for a family, and that account is the rare one that gives you a tax break going in, tax-free growth while it sits, and tax-free withdrawals for medical costs coming out. Many people also get an employer match on top of their own contributions, free money that pushes the combined limit all the way up to $72,000 a year. And here is the part most people never reach. Once the genuinely rich fill those tax-advantaged accounts, they do not stop. They keep going into an ordinary taxable brokerage account, buying broad, boring index funds month after month, decade after decade, never touching them. The real magic is that almost none of this requires willpower, because they automated it. The money is pulled out of every paycheck before it ever hits their checking account, invested the same day, and then ignored. They never see it, so they never miss it, and they never get the chance to spend it on something shiny. That single design choice, paying yourself first on autopilot instead of investing whatever happens to be left over at the end of the month, is most of the difference between the people who quietly get rich and the people who always mean to start next year. The genuinely rich treat those numbers not as suggestions, but as targets, and then they let the most patient force in finance take over. Max out a 401k at this year's limit and earn a historically normal 7% return, and after 30 years, you are looking at roughly $2.5 million from that single account alone. Take Nadia, a hospital nurse on a perfectly ordinary salary. Nadia drives a hand-me-down sedan and brings her coffee from home. And most of her coworkers assume she is just careful with a tight budget. What they do not see is that she has quietly maxed every account available to her for over 15 years, and her net worth has crossed a threshold that would stop them cold if they ever learned the figure. Her wealth is enormous and completely hidden because it lives inside a brokerage statement instead of on her wrist or in her driveway. That is the kind of number that makes accountants smile and everyone else realize they have been keeping score on the wrong scoreboard entirely. Number 6, they owe almost nothing to anyone. Step back and look at the country these people live in. Americans now carry more than $1.2 trillion in credit card debt, a record, and the average interest rate on the balances people actually carry hovers right around 22%. Roughly 6 in 10 card users carry a balance from one month to the next, which means tens of millions of households are paying 22% interest for the privilege of having already spent money they did not have. A balance left sitting at that rate roughly doubles the cost of whatever you bought in a little over 3 years. Buy a couch for $1,000, ignore the statement, and you have effectively paid for 2 couches while only ever sitting on one. The genuinely rich live on the far side of that equation, and the contrast is stark. They use credit cards heavily, sometimes for many thousands of dollars a month, chasing the points and the cash back and the free flights, then wipe the statement clean in full before a single cent of interest can attach itself. Car loans rarely exist in their world, because they paid cash for the Unremarkable car years ago. Any debt that charges more than their investments can reliably earn gets hunted down and eliminated on site, while cheap, tax-advantaged debt, like a low fixed-rate mortgage locked in long ago, often gets left alone on purpose so the cash can keep compounding somewhere more useful. What you end up with is a person who owns nothing flashy, yet owes nothing to anyone, which is its own deep and badly underrated form of wealth. Freedom from payments is freedom. Full stop. When none of your money is already promised to a lender before you even wake up, every dollar you earn that day is genuinely yours to direct. And that shows up in how a person carries themselves long before you could ever prove it on paper. There is a looseness in the shoulders of someone who does not owe the bank a cent, a calm that the heavily financed simply cannot fake, no matter how new the truck in their driveway looks. If you are getting value out of this, take 1 second and subscribe. This channel breaks down the real mechanics of building wealth every single week in plain language with no hype and no gimmicks. Now back to the signals. Number 7. They stay calm when money goes wrong. Watch how a person reacts when the unexpected bill lands, because financial pressure is a kind of truth serum. Maybe the transmission gives out on a Monday morning, or the water heater quietly floods the basement overnight, or the job disappears with 2 weeks of notice and no warning at all. For most households, any one of those alone is an instant 5-alarm emergency, because the median American is living close to the edge and the national personal savings rate has been stuck near 4% of income, which is nowhere near enough cushion to absorb a real shock. The genuinely rich meet that same bad news with an almost unsettling calm, and that calm is not luck or temperament. It grows directly out of a real emergency fund sitting quietly in the background. Here is the mechanical part, and it is where almost everyone leaves money on the table. The quietly wealthy keep many months of expenses in cash, but they keep that cash in a high-yield savings account earning around 4% right now, not in the dusty account where most Americans let it sit. The national average savings rate at this moment is about 1/3 of 1%, and many of the largest traditional banks pay as little as 1/100th of 1%, which is functionally nothing at all. Watch what that gap does to the same pile of money. Put $20,000 in a competitive high-yield account and it earns about $800 a year while you sleep. Leave that identical $20,000 at the national average and it earns about $76. Park it at one of the big name banks paying 1/100th of a percent. And your reward for the entire year is roughly $2. $2. The rich-looking person and the broke-looking person can be holding the exact same balance, yet one of them quietly collected $800 and the other collected enough to buy a cheap sandwich. Multiply that gap across every dollar and every year of a lifetime, and you begin to understand how the distance between two similar-looking people slowly widens into a canyon nobody can cross. Number 8. They buy the good version once and then keep it for years. There is a quiet pattern in how wealthy people shop that, on the surface, looks like spending more rather than less. They buy the well-made boots, the solid wood table, the reliable appliance, and they pay a genuine price up front for it. But here is the move that flips the whole thing. They then keep that item for 10 or 15 years, while the person trying to look rich churns through 3 cheap replacements and 2 trendy upgrades in the same window, and quietly spends more in total to end up with less. Cheap turns expensive the moment you have to buy it 5 times. The genuinely rich understand cost as a long-term number rather than a sticker price, so their homes fill up with older, excellent, deeply unfashionable things that simply refuse to break. Take Marisol, who bought one high-quality leather bag 14 years ago and still carries it daily. The leather is scuffed and the corners are worn soft, and a stranger might assume she cannot afford a new one. The reality is that she has spent less on bags over those 14 years than her coworker spends in 2, because the coworker replaces a trendy one every season, while Marisol bought the thing that lasts and then stopped buying. That same frugal instinct shows up across everything they own. When something breaks, their first thought is to repair it, not replace it, because a $60 fix on a great appliance beats an $800 replacement that is somehow built worse than the thing it is replacing. They tend to know a good tailor, a reliable mechanic, a cobbler who can resole a worn boot. To a culture trained to throw everything away and upgrade on schedule, This looks almost eccentric, maybe even a little cheap. In reality, it is a quiet rebellion against a system designed to make you spend constantly, and it keeps an enormous amount of money in their pockets that everyone else hands over again and again without ever noticing. This habit reads as plain frugality from the outside, and people constantly mistake it for being broke, when it is actually a sophisticated form of spending that prizes durability over novelty. The genuinely rich are not impressed by new for the sake of new. They are impressed by something that earns its keep across years of hard use. And that single shift in mindset quietly saves them a small fortune across a lifetime of purchases that nobody ever catches them making. Number 9, they have made complete peace with the word no. Pay attention to who can say no easily and who simply cannot. The genuinely rich are remarkably comfortable declining the small, social, status-driven expenses that quietly drain everyone around them. A destination bachelor party in another state might simply not make the cut this year. A group dinner at the restaurant that does not fit the week gets a polite pass without a second thought. So does the upgrade that everyone else is buying purely because everyone else is buying it. They opt out of all of it without drama and without a long, guilty apology. And this is one of the most misread behaviors on the entire list because from the outside it can look like they cannot afford to join in. The truth runs closer to the opposite. They can afford almost any of it precisely because they spent years saying no to the things that did not actually matter to them. Lifestyle creep, that slow upgrade of every single expense as income rises, is the most reliable wealth killer there is for high earners, and the quietly rich are immune to it almost by reflex. When their income climbed, their spending mostly held still, and the widening gap between the two got invested instead of inflated away. Consider Dean, who got a substantial raise 3 years ago and changed essentially nothing about how he lives. His apartment is the same, his car is the same, his weekly routine is the same, and the entire raise now flows straight into his investments before he ever sees it. To his friends, who all upgraded their lifestyles the moment their own incomes rose, Dean can look almost stubbornly cheap. What they miss is that he spends generously and without flinching on the 2 or 3 things he genuinely cares about, then goes completely silent on everything else. That selective spending, that willingness to disappoint the crowd, is not deprivation in disguise. It is the quiet discipline that funded a freedom they cannot see and do not yet understand. Number 10. They have stopped trying to look rich because they finally are. Here is the deepest sign, the one that quietly ties every other sign together. At some point, the genuinely wealthy simply stop performing wealth because the performance was always a substitute for the real thing, and they no longer need a substitute. All the energy that other people pour into looking successful gets redirected into things that do not photograph well at all. Time, flexibility, the ability to walk away from a toxic job, a bad client, or a deal that does not feel right. The capacity to put a kid through college without loans, or quietly carry a struggling parent, or take an ordinary Tuesday off without asking a single person for permission. This is the part the surface signals can never capture, and it turns out to be the whole game. What real wealth ultimately buys is not a better car or a louder watch. It buys the slow, unglamorous, almost priceless freedom to live on your own terms and answer to nobody. A person who has that tends to look around at the entire status race and feel no pull toward it whatsoever, which is exactly why they end up looking so ordinary in the first place. They are not broke, and they did not lose. They are simply finished trying to prove anything to anybody, and there is a strange peace that comes with that. One you can almost feel radiating off the people who have it. They are not anxious when the bill arrives, not performing for the table, not secretly running the math in their head about whether they can really afford the thing they just smiled and agreed to. That low background hum of money stress that follows most people through their entire lives has simply gone quiet for them, and what replaces it is a kind of steadiness that no amount of spending can buy. It is, in the end, the whole reason to build wealth in the first place. Not the car, not the house, not the watch, but the freedom to stop worrying and start living on your own terms. Once that clicks for you, the genuinely rich start appearing everywhere because you finally know what you are looking at. A faded car that was paid off years ago. Plain clothes chosen for comfort instead of applause. A telling silence whenever the conversation turns to money. An easy, guilt-free no to the things that drain everyone else. And a stack of full accounts that you will never lay eyes on. Those details are not the wreckage of someone who lost the game. They are the fingerprints of someone who quietly went out and won it. So go back to that parking lot from the very beginning. The man in the leased SUV in his fresh designer everything, and the man in the 12-year-old Honda with his lunch packed from home. You can read it now, can't you? You can see which one the bank statement actually loves, and it is not the one the entire culture was built to applaud. Every one of these 10 signs points back to the same uncomfortable truth. Looking rich and being rich are two completely different skills, and the people who master the second one almost never waste their time on the first. But there is a gap behind that gap, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. Underneath every habit you just watched, the paid-off car, the maxed accounts, the calm in an emergency, the easy no, sits one quiet advantage that absolutely nobody is born with. These people understand how money genuinely works. They were never handed a secret playbook. Most of them simply learned the mechanics that the school system never bothered to teach a single one of us. How debt compounds against you while investing compounds for you. How credit scores are actually calculated. Why those tax-advantaged accounts matter so much more than a checking account ever will. How to build systems that make the smart choice the automatic one, so you never have to rely on willpower you do not have on a hard day. That foundation is the thing that makes all 10 of these signs possible in the first place, and it is the single best place for anyone to start. I put together a complete breakdown of financial literacy that covers exactly that groundwork, the part that has to come before any of the rest of this can make sense. If even one of these signs landed a little too close to home, or felt just out of reach, that breakdown is the natural next step, and it will be there whenever you are ready to take it. Because the quiet wealth you just learned to recognize was never really about luck or a lucky inheritance. It was always about understanding the rules well enough to stop playing the game that was quietly designed for you to lose. And the best possible moment to start understanding them is right now.